I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Chocolate Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you its insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Pre-breeding vaccination is one way to reduce our lamb losses and our barren rates next spring. A key point highlighted by our guest this week, Sarah Campbell, is a veterinary advisor with MSD Animal Health. Sarah highlights the common causes of abortion in our report on farm. We discuss the two most common ones of these, namely enzootic abortion and toxoplasmosis in more detail. It's timely as there's a vaccine available for both of these and needs to be given pre-breeding. We discussed the vaccination programme that can be implemented this autumn for both. As with any vaccine, correct storage, handling and administration are important considerations. Sarah highlights how this can affect vaccine efficacy and some of the key areas to focus on. Finally, as these vaccines have been given a number of weeks in advance of the breeding season, Sarah encourages farmers to order the vaccines in time and plan their vaccination programme prior to the start of breeding season. We start off, however, with Sarah highlighting the need to identify the cause of abortion through veterinary laboratories.
When we're thinking about lamb losses in general, I suppose we focus on the lambs that we have on the ground. So in the first 24, 48 hours, the lambs that are actually born, and then as well as that after turnout. But unfortunately, quite a lot of lambs are actually lost prior to being born. So that's between tupping and scanning, and as well as that, even before the due date. So there's stillbirths and abortions are occurring during that period of time. So to increase our lambing crop that are present on the ground, it's well worth focusing on those lambs that are actually lost to the flock and taking a look and finding out, why are those ewes barren, or what was the reason for the abortion, and doing a bit of an investigation there, because there are many causes. And to be honest with you, Ciarán, just by looking at a ewe or looking at an aborted animal or aborted fetus, it's impossible to say. We can sort of make very sort of educated guesses, but to be honest with you, we always advise and recommend that the farmer, if you do find an aborted fetus, that you would pick it up and bring the placenta, if you can find it as well, bring that to the lab and get some investigations done.
And it's timely we're talking about the moments there, like when breeding sales and the breeding season is kicked off. Of them abortions, what are the two most prevalent ones we see?
Yeah, so common things are common, Ciarán. So every year we see toxoplasmosis and chlamydia as the two most common causes of abortion and lamb loss in ewes. So they are the two ones that we would say, it's well worth thinking about those and controlling those within your flock. Now, there are lots of other causes. Many are infectious, things like E. coli, salmonella, campylobacter as well is on the increase. And then as well as that, there's also some non-infectious causes, like, say, for example, a ewe got a hurt or, dog worry or something like that, or a limited space. So there are lots of different things, but definitely toxo and enzootic abortion are the two most common.
And I suppose the one advantage we have, Sarah, is like toxo and enzootic, your chlamydia abortion. They're two we can actually vaccinate for. Maybe we focus on them in particular. Like enzootic first, it's probably something that has gained a lot more ground in recent years, so it's certainly more common when we look at the disease reports come back from the labs. How is it spread, and how does it have an impact on the ewe?
Yeah, so enzootic abortion of ewes, it's a sheep-to-sheep transfer disease, okay? So if you don't have it in your flock and then all of a sudden it appears, it's likely that you've purchased in a latently infected ewe. So you've purchased in a ewe that was infected herself last year. You've brought her into your flock, or you've brought a group of ewes into your flock, or you've purchased some replacements. And what happens then is the next time they become pregnant, at around about sort of 90 days of gestation, there's a big inflammation in the uterus and in the placenta, and then that ewe goes on to abort. Now, when she aborts, the fluids that are passed out are hugely contaminated, and that is the main source of spread to other ewes in the group. So that's when they become infected. Now, if they're gone past the window of susceptibility, so if they're gone past sort of 90, 100, 110 days, they'll generally lamb down normally. But if not, you'll have lots of those. Your own home reared ewes will actually abort at that time. If they're gone beyond that stage, then what will happen is they may become infected because they're present in the pen with the infected aborted material, because sheep like to come over and have a sniff and have a look at each other and lick a lamb and things like that, so they can become infected that way, just simply through oral ingestion and inhaling the bacteria. And then they'll go on normally this year, but next year what will happen is when they become pregnant, they'll abort next year. So it's one of those really frustrating ones, Ciarán, where it can linger for years and years in a flock, even despite your best interventions, even despite maybe going in with a vaccine or going in with, other antibiotics or separating out your flock and your groups and things like that. It's a really, really frustrating one because it lingers on for years and years. So it's one of those ones, if you don't have it in your closed flock, that's brilliant. You want to keep it out. But if you're an open flock, you definitely are at a high risk of enzootic abortion entering into your flock. So it's a sheep to sheep transfer.
And like when we think about that mode of transfer, like it's in the laminin fluid. So any sheep in contact in that year could be one ewe aborts the first year, could be 4 or 5 in contact or in the individual laminin pens. It probably goes unnoticed in a lot of flocks for a couple of years. And it brings up that term abortion storm. It really is typical of that it's a low underlying thing that's not been picked up early enough.
Yeah, generally the first year, if you've bought in, maybe it could only be one, ewe in the whole group that you've bought in, or it might be only two. So you might say to yourself, oh, those 50 lambs bought in or 50 ewes bought in, oh, sure, only 1 or 2 of them aborted, and that's you're happy enough, you're okay, everything else went well. But if they aborted due to chlamydia, the other ones in that group will be infected and can pick it up. So that's why we always say, if you are buying in, lamb them down separately, quarantine. Think about if there is a latently infected ewe here, how can I minimize the risk of spread to the rest of my flock? So at least you can consider them, it's an awful term to say, but your own home flock could be your clean flock, and the bought in ones are classed as dirty until proven otherwise, if you know what I mean. So just think about it as a total separate flock. If anything aborts, you're containing it within that small group, and then you bring them over to your own flock once you're happy.
The more ewes infected in subsequent years, the bigger the spread's going to be every year.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about as well, Ciarán, is like in that flock or in that group, say you've got a ewe that's aborting due to chlamydia, remember there might be actual baby lambs in that pen as well as adult ewes. So if you've got female lambs that potentially could end up being replacements in the future, they are also potentially now latently infected as well. So we would always say that if you have a ewe that has aborted and you're trying to foster on, another lamb or anything like that, it would be a male lamb you'd be considering if you were going to do anything like that, rather than a female lamb, just to try and break that cycle. But remember, once it kicks off in your flock, it sort of is a spiral effect then for the next couple of years.
And it really brings us back to the point of why foster ewes and pet lambs are also high risk. That's probably not fully accounted for in farms. Look, if we move on to the control option, like there is a vaccine available for it, and now is the time to be considering it. How does that vaccination protocol work for enzootic?
Yeah, so for enzootic abortion, I suppose many people will think straight away, of going in with antibiotics, and definitely antibiotics are indicated in an abortion storm for sure, but unfortunately they don't provide any long-lasting immunity or anything like that. So that's where the vaccine comes in. It plays hand in hand, really, to go in and actually stimulate immunity. The vaccine is live, so Enzovax is a live vaccine, and it's given to ewes and breeding females before pregnancy to stimulate immunity. So it's a 2 ml dose. It can be given into the muscle or under the skin. It's a live vaccine, so like all vaccines, we try to use them up, within the first few hours. Obviously, and handling them and storing them in the right way in the fridge, etc., until we're going to use them. It can be given to females from 5 months old, and you will try to give that in the 4-month period before they go to the ram. So if you're going to the ram this year, you will give them their vaccine then in that time period before they go to the ram this year. Try not to go too close to actually sending them out with the tip or with the top, because you want to give the vaccine time to work. So no closer than 4 weeks prior to topping, and then that should be fine for those females. Yeah.
And look, it's a lifetime vaccine, but I suppose it's important for a flock that maybe got a diagnosis this spring of enzootic. It's a whole flock vaccine the first year, and then subsequent years you're covering and need coming in.
Yeah, that's right, Kieran. So I suppose the first year, if you have an outbreak, it can be, quite a big ordeal to do the whole flock. But then in the subsequent years, then it's just your replacements there annually. So the vaccine will cover the flock for at least 3 to 4 years. So if you have a high risk flock, there may be an indication to go in there and revaccinate yos if you can identify them who they are, the older ones. But for the rest of the yos, then it's just your replacements then annually.
And probably just one caveat there, in a case of a bad abortion, so you can see a little bit of that latent abortion for its subsequent season.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Kieran, because definitely prevention is easier than cure. It always is. So if you're coming into a flock, you're going to be buying in lambs or replacements, definitely vaccinating prior to an abortion storm is key, because at least everyone has immunity by that stage. But if you're vaccinating after chlamydia has been diagnosed in a flock, you're sort of on the back foot. You're vaccinating yos that potentially could be latently infected. You're vaccinating yos that are potentially have already aborted, and you're also vaccinating yos that hopefully haven't actually been infected at that point. So the vaccine works best in yos that haven't been infected, that if they do become exposed, it'll reduce the number of abortions that occur. But unfortunately, if some are already latently infected, what the vaccine will do is it'll reduce the number of abortions that occurs. And as well as that, some will already have aborted, but you've no way of identifying those yos unless you've marked them. But the ones that are latently infected, there's no possible way of identifying those yos. So you may well see abortions in subsequent years despite vaccination, but definitely the vaccine will reduce those numbers significantly. So it is still well worth using the vaccine in a flock where enzootic abortion has been diagnosed, for sure. Yeah.
I think like anyone has been through it, it's definitely a no-brainer because it just dramatically reduces it. But like,
Mm-hmm.
given the prevalence is out there, it is something that has to be considered for anyone that's purchasing in their females every year. Maybe if we just move to
Definitely.
toxoplasmosis, it's slightly different in how it affects the animal and how it's transmitted. You might just explain a little bit about how it works.
Yes, so with enzootic abortion, it's sheep to sheep disease. So, the infection is spread in the lambing pen during the time of abortion to other yos. But with toxoplasmosis, it's slightly different. It's sort of, the rodent is eaten by the cat, and then the cat sheds the toxoplasmosis eggs or oocysts in its feces. And then those contaminate the feed and water supply for the yos, and then they pick them up in their hay or in their straw or even in the water supply, and that's how they become infected. So whereas enzootic is sheep to sheep, toxoplasmosis is rodent to cat to sheep. So it's not spread between sheep technically. So it is a bit of a different one where, the cat can basically, those eggs when they're shed in feces can survive for years. So even if you have had an issue in 1 year, things can linger on for years once those eggs are present or the oocysts are present in the environment. And I suppose the thing about cats is, Kieran, like, even though we might not necessarily have a farm cat or a pet cat ourselves, they just roam onto your land, they roam onto your farm. Some people graze quite close to maybe a town or a village where maybe there's a housing estate and there's a high, population of cats around those areas. So some areas are quite a high risk, but then even just out in the rural countryside, you can see cats as well. So the majority of sheep will become exposed to toxoplasmosis in their lifetime. So it is one of those ones where everybody should consider vaccinating for toxoplasmosis for sure.
So, like, I suppose that is the one key difference. It is not sheep to sheep; it's an environmental one. It's probably a misconception that's out there. The timing of that abortion or timing of that infection can affect
Mm-hmm.
where we see the problem occurring. And I suppose it's probably a good thing to clarify that young sheep are probably the biggest risk. So anyone considering making new lambs, they're certainly a high risk. How does it affect it depending on when they contract toxoplasmosis?
So I suppose the outcome of infection really is dictated by the timing. So if you've got a yo, she's not pregnant and she's infected at that particular time, there's no clinical signs, no clinical effect. We would hardly even know she was infected. But if infection occurs after mating, so in early pregnancy, the pregnancy will be resorbed and she will be scanned as a barren yo. Um, During mid-pregnancy, we can see mummified lambs or abortions occurring, and then during late pregnancy, the same abortions. You'll see a little bit more developed lambs, stillborn, and also the birth of weak-born lambs. So the later in gestation, the lamb becomes more developed, but if infection occurs, then we will see clinical signs based on that time point. So it can lead to losses at that particular time later on during pregnancy. And definitely younger ewes are more susceptible. Older ewes are likely to have been exposed in their lifetime just simply because they've been around for longer. So they will have picked up toxoplasmosis and developed some sort of natural immunity. The problem with natural immunity is we don't know how long it lasts. So you can't guarantee that it's going to, keep the ewe, protect the ewe for years or for how long. So I suppose that's something we would think about when we're putting in a control program.
And it just naturally leads us on to like the vaccination protocol for toxoplasmosis. What does that involve?
Yeah, so the vaccine, again, it's another live vaccine. Similar to Enzootic. So Toxovax is a live vaccine. It's a 2 ml dose and it's given into the muscle. Again, it can be given to ewe lambs from 5 months old, and you'll try and do this vaccine in the year that the ewes are going to go to the ram. So in the 4 month period prior to topping. And we'll try and get this vaccine. You can go as close up to 3 weeks prior to topping, but I always say to farmers, get your vaccines ordered, get them in early, because if you go too close to topping, everybody's ordering their vaccines and there's potential then for us to run out of stock. So plan, if you have your replacements, plan ahead and get your vaccines into the ewes in good time. So yeah, it's a live vaccine. The good thing is if you are using Toxovax and Enzoovax, these two vaccines can be given at the same time just to reduce the amount of handling and stress on the flock, and as well as that, less time, for the farmer as well to be handling the ewes.
Oh, and it's a very good point because often time is limited at that time of year. You're doing other jobs and it can sometimes lapse or be forgotten about. Look, you mentioned some aspects of this already, but the basics of handling vaccines, are storage and correct administration. How important is that for vaccine efficacy, and what are the kind of key pointers we need to look out for?
Yeah, so I suppose the vaccines are only as good as how they've been kept. And I suppose just as a side note to say that, vaccines are extremely important for animal health, but I suppose we should also remember other things like our biosecurity, management, housing, good hygiene, all of those kind of things do as well play a role. But the vaccines themselves, it's important to remember that the vaccines have been manufactured in a factory that basically, you know, it's very well regulated, the actual temperature, and we should be storing our vaccines when we buy them from our veterinary surgeon or an agri store. We bring them home, we put them straight into a working fridge, because if they go outside or they deviate outside of those temperatures for any length of time, really that renders those vaccines useless. And especially live vaccines, we want to be reconstituting them and administering them in the time frame. So every vaccine has a different shelf life once opened. So for Hepativac P, I think off the top of my head, it's maybe 10 hours. For Enzoovax and Toxovax, it might be slightly shorter. You might only have sort of a 3 or 4 hour window there. When you're vaccinating ewes, the technique is important as well. Make sure if you can that you're doing them when the ewes have dry. So I suppose good weather isn't always guaranteed in Ireland, but if the fleece is dry, there's less likelihood of injection site abscesses. If the fleece is wet, bacteria can be mobilized on the skin and go in with the needle under the skin and set up an abscess. It's not that common at all when vaccinating for abortion, but it's just to note for yourself. And we always say to vaccinate healthy animals only. Some people ask us, if they have a sick sheep and they're doing the rest of the batch, is it okay to vaccinate that one? And we would always say no, just because that animal is probably being challenged, its immune system. And if you want to get the best out of the vaccine, you would vaccinate them when they're healthy.
It's going to affect our immune response with this. Look, it's certainly something you need to be considering. There is also the consideration, the are live vaccines, the order time lead in, like you mightn't always be able to just walk into your veterinary supplier and have it sitting on the shelf. So it's something you have to be prepared for.
Absolutely. So Enzoovax is usually something that will be in stock, but Toxovax is made to order basically. So at certain times of the year, the vaccine, if you know exactly how many doses you're going to use and you know when you're going to give it, try and get your vaccines in, order them in well ahead of time, because there is normally a 2-week lead time for Toxoplasmosis to be ordered. And then again, if there's any issues or any delays or anything like that, that could push that delivery date out by another few days. And perhaps if you're up against your time that you want to put the O's to the ram, that could push your topping period out altogether. So, because you need to get the vaccines in 3 to 4 weeks prior to topping, you do really need to be thinking about it well ahead of season. So, the fact that you can give the vaccines in the 4-month period prior to topping, you've plenty of time there to think about trying to get the vaccines in. So Toxoplasmosis is one of those ones where you do need to be thinking ahead and getting it ordered, because of the turnaround is 2 weeks, and then there's such a short shelf life simply because they're live vaccines. But definitely planning ahead is key to get your vaccines in on time.
Sarah, certainly something needs to be put on the to-do list at the moment. Really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks very much for your time.
Not at all. Thanks very much, Ciarán.
Okay, we're going to finish the episode up at this point. And again, I'd like to thank Sarah for giving up her time to be with us today and highlighting some of the key areas we need to focus on. Vaccination pre-breeding can reduce some of the losses we get every spring. It's particularly important for those who have a confirmed diagnosis of enzootic abortion or an ongoing problem with toxoplasmosis, or those who are purchasing a lot of their breeding females in from public sales. It's something that needs to be addressed in time and prior to breeding, so it's really one that has to be on that to-do list in the coming weeks. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Chocolate Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.